Welcome to a community built of tomorrow's business leaders. Hey guys, I'm Gary Freitas, and this is the Socius podcast. Welcome back to the Socius podcast. Today we've got Gary Freitas on the show, and in the interest of full disclosure, yes, Gary and I are cousins. We are family. But Gary, we got Gary on the show today because Gary and I have worked closely in business over the years, for many years. And he's always been somebody that we've, looked up to and been inspired by what they've done. And so, Gary, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Great to be here. Absolutely.
Mate, so with the Socius podcast, it's a little bit different to what you and I have done previously. And so, for the interest of the audience, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what had you be to where you are today.
Yeah, cool. So my name's Gary Freitas. I run a production company, so a media production company. That's video, photography, basically digital storytelling through creative means, whether that be still images or moving images. The majority of what we do is moving image work. In terms of, started the business probably about 14 years ago. Had a business partner at the time. We didn't see eye to eye after 3 or 4 years, which often happens. And probably about 8 or 9 years ago, kind of bought him out, transformed the business, changed our brand, restructured our company, and have never looked back.
So take us back to day one and what had you start the business? What had you get into videography from the very beginning?
Yeah.
Take us back to day one.
Even if I go back before day one in many ways, I remember I was back in high school and I was kind of acing my academics, and English and literature was a really strong point for me. And I'd kind of, it might sound horrible and it's not cocky at all, I was getting really great results in writing. And I thought, God, is there an opportunity here to do something different? I feel like, why are we all writing? Surely there's other mediums, is there another multimedia option for presenting this content? And so I actually went to a teacher, I think I was in year 9, and said to her, look, is there an option for me not to turn in an essay, but turn in a video piece of content? And she's like, this is English, we've never done that. I'm like, it'll still be researched, we'll still produce content, I'll get other students involved. And she's like, yeah, okay. So we went ahead and actually produced a video around the Port Arthur massacre. Because we thought that would it make more sense to just say do testimonial role plays, responses from the public, whether that would have more impact than just writing something about something that's quite visceral, something like a massacre, which is obviously a horrible thing. And yeah, we did amazing. It was a great video. It was actually great fun to produce as well. But I think that's where it kind of kicked off the interest in the idea of producing content that wasn't always just written, or that supported and complemented written content. Yeah. And then I guess day one business was actually I started a business. I was working for somebody else for about 2 years. They were diagnosed bipolar, which is actually not an issue in any way, but the way they responded to that is they didn't get any care. And so they actually came into work every day, and it was like going into war. It was like every day you would get yelled at, every day you'd get screamed at. And after 2 years of that, myself and one of the other workers said, you know what if we start our own thing here? So we kind of stepped out on our own. We actually started a franchise of another business, which in hindsight wasn't the best approach, because the other business was collecting the money and then paying us our commission, our percentage, which they didn't do. So it means that after 2 years, we had this kind of $50,000 worth of commission that was waiting to come in that never did. Yeah, wow. And then that business went under. They went under. They took 20 employees worth of super with them. They took our commission with them. Had to go through the court process. It was a real disaster. And then from there, we basically started from scratch again and said, okay, let's go back to our roots, what we do well, and started a business that was basically focused around commercial property, real estate, and corporate. And
so is this the same business partner that you said you sort of had a falling out with? And didn't work out?
Yeah, that's the business partner. Yeah, we're the ones that kind of went ahead and started that new business together, that new venture, because we figured that we could do it better. If we're going to lose money, we may as well do it on our decisions and our choices. Yep. And for me, that made a lot more sense than kind of just blindly following a franchise model or something else that didn't work for us. And I know that franchises can work for lots of people, but it didn't work for us.
Yeah. And look, we pride ourselves on being a no bullshit podcast. Yeah. So if you don't mind and you're open to it, like what do you think it was that didn't have the partnership work? Because often we see, particularly new businesses start businesses with friends. Yep. And it doesn't necessarily work out. And that can have a real strain on that friendship or that relationship. Tell us a little bit about that and give us the insights onto how that
Absolutely.
experience was.
my business partner was actually a great guy, really talented, great at building relationships. It's actually something that we had in common, that we were really great at kind of building rapport and building relationships. And we were driven by our work. We probably just had maybe a different alignment in terms of values, and not in a negative way. He just had maybe a focus more, I guess, around building the business to produce more income, Like that was kind of the outcome. At least that's in my interpretation. Clearly he may disagree with me. And in my mind, I guess I was working so hard to produce income to have a certain lifestyle. Whereas I think for him, the lifestyle aspect was maybe a little bit further down the path. And for me, it was something that I wanted more immediately. I wanted to have the flexibility and the liberty of working in a business where I was the boss and I could, have that flexibility day to day. Now, in hindsight, I think that I think there were parts of that where I was right, and there were parts of that where he was definitely right, where the longer sacrifice and the longer slog make a lot more sense initially. But I guess we were probably 4, 5, 6 years into that. And by that stage, I was starting to get tired. Honestly, I was losing my own motivation. And he obviously, couldn't by any means carry his motivation and motivate me, so that wasn't going to be ideal. So funnily enough, we actually both went away on kind of mini holidays, and when we came back, not at the same time, because obviously we were only 2 people in the business. When we came back, I had decided, you know what, I'll give it 6 weeks, and if we're just not either seeing eye to eye or I don't feel the business is where it needs to be, I'm pulling the plug.
And how long were you in business for together?
About 4 or 5 years together.
Okay.
I'd have to double check, but I think it was 5 years. And funnily enough, he got back from his little break, a couple of days off, and maybe about a week later, he said to me, I think I'm done. I think I'm out of here. I was like, oh. In my head, I thought, oh, I lasted like 5 weeks longer than you, because I kind of had this plan in 5 weeks' time to kind of, wash my hands of the business and step away and, take what we'd made from it. I must say it was a really interesting thing going through that breakup of business. Probably 2 things. One is getting to business with friends is fine. I think there's no issue with that at all if you are on the same page, but get contractual. Anybody who's willing to be in business with you, they should have no issue signing a piece of paper that says, this is what we do, this is your roles and responsibilities, this is mine. To be honest with you, that would have made it really clear from the outset, and then he could have held me more accountable. And vice versa, I could have said, that's not what I want, I'm not going to sign the dotted line. We didn't have that. So when the time came to split the business, there was this, we kind of got to this impasse. I made an offer on the business, a cash offer, to buy him out. And he said, no, I think that's not a fair valuation, which is understandable. We went through solicitors. We probably spent, I think, somewhere between $15,000, maybe $20,000 on solicitors because there was no initial contract or agreement. And then in the end of the day, I think he got $7,000 more than the offer I gave him initially. And it took 2.5 months to do. And we spent, between us, 20 grand.
Legals. Yeah.
Correct, exactly right. So in the end, if we had had an agreement in place, it probably would have made that process a lot easier. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'd recommend going into business with friends, but I guess with your eyes open.
Yeah. Look, and I think contractual agreements definitely make a lot of sense. But do you think there was a misalignment in vision? Like, did you sit down together and say, this is where we want to be? Because obviously you've touched on how, you wanted to push a bit of lifestyle, and business for you was, producing some flexibility to have a life outside of the business, whereas he was like longer sacrifice to then get income and then have a lifestyle. So I guess there's 2 questions in this. One, did you sit down for, I guess, to work out a vision? And 2, what's your vision now on business? What do you see business being for you? Is it to give you lifestyle, or is it that harder slog?
So no, we actually never sat down and specifically said, this is the vision for the business. This is what our mission statement is. We kind of didn't go through that process. And I think that's because we made an assumption. We made an assumption that we'd both come out of a similar background, similar skill set. And we thought, because we're doing the work and we're so task focused, it became very easy to just no, put that to the side. It's working. So why break what's working?
I think that's super important because, we see all the time, I guess, practitioners that are great at their technical craft, wanting to set up a business and doing that with a partner or a friend and thinking that the sole reason for being in business is making money. But it's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
Evidently.
No, look, absolutely. And I think had we sat down and had that conversation, by the way, we may not, you also grow, right? Just like if you got a partner and you either grow with that partner, you may grow separately, but you grow with that partner, or you grow apart. And same thing with even in a business relationship, business partner. We may have started with the same vision. We may have started with all we could have written everything down and had a business plan and had the right contract, and still 5 years later we might have been like, actually, I want to travel. And I don't. It's like, oh, okay. Well, what is the business? What happens with the business?
Mm.
I mean, I must say, I guess looking back at it, yes, the contractual element is important, and I think sitting down and actually having that conversation initially.
Mm.
But then it's the regular check-in. It's the 3-month, 6-month review of that. Okay, are we still on track? Is our strategy still make sense
Yeah.
for us personally? I mean, ultimately, I got to a point where I'm a person that perseveres a lot, but I had lost the motivation to do what we were doing because there was probably a lack of purpose in it other than generating an income.
Yeah.
And we probably broke up the business probably just after, I'm just trying to think, probably not that long after the GFC, after we'd
Right.
recovered from the GFC.
Yeah.
So we kind of stuck with it for the GFC. And in fact, I think I even remember having you in our office back in Mascot those days, kind of a 30 square meter office, where we were kind of twiddling our thumbs because during the GFC, it was like, wow, it was like 2 months of no work.
Mm.
And just thinking back on that, and then I guess the carryover of that over the next couple of years was like, wow, I'm really tired.
And so tell us now, what is your, I guess, view on business now? What does business mean to you? Is it a vehicle for a lifestyle better
Yeah.
than a career, or is it, I guess, just simply producing money?
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's definitely. I think sometimes people get caught up in kind of the lofty purpose behind business, and I think that's really important to talk about purpose. I'm sure we'll talk about that today. But for me, it is definitely about a lifestyle.
Mm.
Even today, driving over here to do the podcast, I'd just come off a couple of meetings. I'd sent a couple of proposals this morning, and I thought, but isn't it nice now that I have my team back in the studio? They're doing great work. They're working with our clients. They're taking those calls. They're doing the creative, and I've actually able to step out and go and do something that is not income producing necessarily, but is probably still adding value to how I look at business, how I feel about business. And actually, at the end of the day, this is part of that lifestyle component, the ability to step away and do something that doesn't necessarily have a dollar amount attached to it as a return.
Yeah. And so then take us through, I guess you went through that breakup and then you moved into setting up your current business, which is Lumapixel.
Lumapixel, correct, yeah. So, I mean, look, it was a tough time. Because we restructured the business, there was some shareholdings that changed and that kind of thing as well. And because of the delay in making that happen between those two structures, I ended up paying staff wages on my Amex for 10 weeks. So, and I didn't pay myself at all because I knew that there was going to be money that had to be invested in solicitors in a whole range of areas, and we weren't a cash-rich company, and obviously just come out of a buyout as well. So it took some time to get that right. But I mean, I must say I'm very proud of the fact that we didn't let any staff go. Nothing changed from that point of view. None of our clients probably would have ever known there was ever an issue at all because work kept going out, projects kept going out. And yeah, so now we're at Lumapixel. So we've been running for, what is it officially? I think 2013. I think 2013. So kind of 7-8 years now. And yeah, it's been a great journey to find great people and also learn a lot about myself and learn a lot about the things that I don't know about business. You don't know what you don't know.
I think it demonstrates a lot of grit, I guess graft to want to take a risk like putting staff salaries on an Amex, where potentially you were still getting work in and there was cash flow issues, but it's still a big risk. So undoubtedly, it's great to see that it's succeeded to where you are now, and building a flourishing business, which is fantastic with multiple staff. What do you think was the number one factor for your success throughout that period?
It's interesting, actually. I was having this discussion with my partner the other day, my fiance, about what it is that in particular makes me or makes our business kind of run. And I think in some ways, there's probably two parts to it. I think there's kind of failure and persistence. So, I mean, we're a business that runs relatively lean, and I have a life that runs relatively lean, so that I can afford myself the opportunity to do things, or try different things, or even experiment with clients' projects. Sometimes we'll take a hit on a project, but I want to really get that project done because the purpose behind it aligns with our values. It's exciting, it's colorful, it's interesting, and the client believes in their content. I'm willing to come to the table for projects like that where I feel like my team are going to be inspired by that content as well. I don't want to be a BuzzFeed. I don't want to be producing 200 videos a week, burning through editors that have just come out of uni in 3 months. Oh, who cares? There's another 50 editors ready to go. That's not the business model I want. I want people that actually feel inspired to come to work, even if sometimes, their ultimate goal might be like doing a feature film, but I want them to come to work and be like, no, but what I'm producing is still of a high quality. We we care about what we do. We care about our clients, and that for me is kind of paramount. So for me, it's basically been a stack of failures that I've learned from, and the persistence to continue to invest in myself and to invest in the business. I have a great amount of self-belief. So even if tomorrow the entire business shut up shop, that's not a reflection or a definition of me as a person. Most likely, I'd start another business immediately. If for whatever reason the business wasn't working, and we've had a tough time with COVID and other things as well. I definitely think that the self-belief to continue to produce great work, and the belief in myself to having a low sales month, go find more sales. I believe in myself to do that.
Now, is it self-belief in your craft or self-belief in yourself as a business leader / entrepreneur, or is it self-belief that everything's going to work out regardless?
I think, to be honest with you, I think some of our clients don't hire us necessarily for the quality of our work. The quality of work speaks for itself. In fact, I was actually recently, we were redoing the values in our business. And for a business our size, sometimes you don't take the time to sit down and do your values and your vision and things like that. A lot of businesses skip that step, right? Because they just need to, I don't know, they spend 3 weeks designing the logo, and then they kind of ignore the actual business function stuff that needs to be happening. And we actually kind of sat down last year during COVID to talk about what our values look like. And we had things in there like professional. I'm just like, isn't every company professional? Like, why on earth do we need that in our company values? You would hope if you go and engage somebody in a professional service that they are professional. And so we took all that kind of abstract kind of fluff out. And we went, okay, so what are we actually really good at? And what came out of it was like, we're really good at and we really enjoy sharing ideas. And we will share ideas regardless of whether there's a return for us. So if a client sits down with me in a room and they walk out with 10 ideas and they're inspired, that for me is still a win, regardless of whether or not they do a job with us. Now, they may well, in the next 6 months or year or next week, they may come back and go, actually, I want to do that project. But that's actually what gets our clients excited about working with us, is the fact that we are sharing ideas and that honestly, we're a little bit left field sometimes. We're kind of irreverent. When we look at our kind of persona for our business, we're very much the kind of creative outlaw is kind of where we sit, if you think about the kind of 7 or 8 kind of business personas. And we like the idea that no idea is a bad idea, that we can throw things people's ways. One of the other values in our business, other than sharing ideas, is quality. So maintaining a level of quality, a standard that we're happy with. And the last one is being approachable. When we first started the business, literally 14 years ago, my business partner and I, we went to a branding agency. And when they were doing our brand, they wrote underneath our company name, they wrote, people like us. And we said, sorry, can you clarify? Do you mean like people like us? Meaning like we're looking for people like us? Yeah. Or do you mean like people like us? And he's like, no, we think people like us. I was like, because like we do. Like people meet you and they like you guys. That's why they want to work with you. You want to do business with people you like. You want to do business with people you trust. And that has actually continued through the business. Actually, one value that hasn't changed is the fact that people, they feel comfortable to approach us about something. They may not ultimately work with us, and that's okay as well, but they do feel comfortable approaching us.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a relationship focused towards business, and I think everyone can agree that providing that you're satisfying a fundamental need and building a relationship with a client, that there's always going to be some success if they get on with you, because as you said, people do business with people that they like and trust. What is it that has you and your team come in, day out? Because it sounds like there's a whole lot of passion in behind that. But is it passionate about videography? Is it passionate about storytelling? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's good. I think there's a passion for problem solving from me personally, and I think you'll often find that businesses, and you can look at numerous studies from KPMG to Deloitte to PwC across industries, that often a business reflects the values and the attitude of its founder. If the founder is like, I work 16 hours a day and no standard is good enough for me, unrelenting standards, then the business tends to reflect that in a good way and bad way. And for me, I guess personally, I like to persevere with things. Personally, I like to problem solve things, whether they be technical, whether they be creative. And that's really where I'm at my strength. And that has filtered down to the business in terms of it's kind of a little bit of our mantra is, doing a lot with a little, that we're lean and we're resourceful, but that we also have these kind of big ideas. And for the right clients, those big ideas are going to make a massive difference to what they do in their campaigns. In terms of my staff, look, our tagline is kind of transforming perceptions by illuminating ideas. Now, the transforming perceptions component, we only really settled on that last year because we were trying to work out what it is that we actually do. And often, like, I don't know, if you think about someone like, Roses Only, you might think that their purpose for business is selling flowers. It's like, well, actually, their purpose in business is kind of spreading love, sharing love. Whether it's somebody who's lost somebody, whether it's somebody who it's Valentine's Day, whether it's a gift to your partner who's just had a child, what they're doing is sharing love. And when they made that the focus of their business has kind of boomed in the last 2 years.
Give us a little bit of a snapshot as to what that process was like
Mm.
in demonstrating your vision. You and your team, tell us more about that.
Yeah. I probably didn't take a traditional approach to it. We did kind of two sessions. We did a session which I led, which is not great. And then we did a session that was actually led by a facilitator, actually bringing in a professional who does that every day and who really knows to kind of ask the difficult questions. And the stuff that I did, we got probably about a quarter, maybe half the way there. And then with the facilitator, we kind of got all the way there. And that was really sitting down with my team and giving them the time to breathe. Probably the most difficult thing in our business is that whenever I allocate my team or a team member to something that isn't specifically project related, and this is probably comes from the founder's attitude in the business, they feel a little bit like, oh, when can I get back to the thing that is kind of creative and income generating and project related, because they're focused on that. So sometimes we don't actually take out enough time to just sit back and like ruminate, think about what it is that the business is about, or think about projects. And that's actually something we've really tried to do in the last 2 years, is take the time to stop and go, no, if we spend 3 hours now, this project is better off, maybe 2 or 3 times better off.
Yeah.
If we take a whole day to do a creative concept, even though we've taken the time out of our production time, no doubt that's going to give us a better shoot, better production, better quality, better outcome. And so for us, that process was, okay, how can we sit down together with a room full of people who actually are itching to get back to their projects and take out a half a day, take out 4 or 5 hours where we go through the system of understanding things that we think that work. Because people often focus on the things that don't work. And by the way, there's a lot to be learned from failure, by all means, 100%. In fact, if you haven't read a book like Black Box Thinking, it'll change the way you look at business. I would highly recommend it. But so there's a lot to come out of failure. But sometimes, especially with staff members, where you can't necessarily have as honest a conversation sometimes as you would like, because you're concerned about, will they leave or will they stay? What if they don't believe in what we're trying to do? Sometimes you end up not communicating enough, and you actually don't enroll them in the vision process, because it's like, oh, leader, vision, and then it trickles down. Whereas reality, vision should be where we're going and how we're going to get there, but you need people on board for that. Like, there's no use kind of like trying to steer the ship yourself, whereas at the back, the containers are falling off the ship, like you're losing all your cargo because no one's strapped anything down. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And ultimately, I actually want the vision for the business to also come from the team members, because if I'm not there, if I'm away for a week, I don't want the entire business to kind of grind to a halt just because nobody actually knows, why are we here? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And I must say that exercise was really great with that facilitator, kind of going through what our team thought was working, what our team thought wasn't working, and also getting to write objectively and subjectively, actually, what it is that we do. And the answers are actually quite diverse. Some people were like, we're digital storytellers. Some people were like, we're corporate video makers. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Which I don't see ourselves that way, but a couple of people did. One person saw us as problem solvers. I saw us as transforming perceptions. As like, I feel like every client that comes to us, we are adapting to who they are. We're learning about their business, and then we are trying to transform some kind of perception. Whether that be a perception about their brand, about a product, about a service. Might be a personal transformation. Maybe a CEO who wants to communicate to their team and he wants to come across as softer, more endearing. It's like, because every time he does a report, his team feels like, oh my God, you're telling me everything we did wrong last quarter. You're telling us how much we missed our revenue by. Working with a client like that to do media training, to find that balance where his staff can then watch that video and go, actually, I think he's really genuine. He's really authentic. I know why I want to follow this guy.
There's really 3 things that I hear in that vision exercise that you've run, which I think is fantastic. Number 1, I think, is definitely getting that working on your business is so much more important than working in the business half the time, because too many times we see entrepreneurs focusing on being a practitioner, working in the business, getting lost in the business and not working on the business. So I think that's fantastic, number 1. Number 2, I heard that you got some areas are your weaknesses and you can't necessarily run a session like that. So getting in the help where necessary, and building on number 2, where a great leader really knows what their weaknesses are and leverages us from that, is when you bring on staff. I see so often people, I guess, dictating a vision and not including the other stakeholders, because I think there's so much value in bringing in your team to I guess build that culture, build that vision, and
Yeah.
I think it's always refining as well. It's always adapting,
Yeah.
and that's what I absolutely love as to what you've done with that vision exercise. So that's
Oh,
fantastic.
look, and for anybody that's listening, or even for yourself or any other people in business, I was talking about focusing on people's strengths. So you can look and learn from failure a lot, but focusing on your individual team members' strengths is a great way to understand how to communicate with them. I mean, essentially, it's like doing a languages of love, but for a business. So, if you're not familiar with languages of love, which you probably are, the idea is like, do you like gifts? Are you about human touch? Those kind of things. Same thing with a business. For example, I was talking to a team member about moving to our new office, and she's like, "Look, I would potentially consider not as much of a pay bump if I could get parking." And I was like, "Really?" I was like, "Really? Is that important?" She goes, "Yeah. Like, I'm traveling from further away. Parking is actually a massive thing." It's like, well, if I didn't ask the question, if I didn't put that in front of her, I would have no idea that was so important to her. And vice versa, if you do something like a VIA personality test. So, I mean, obviously there's lots of personalities. There's disc profiles. There's all this other crap out there. Don't get me wrong. Some of it's great. Some of it's not so great. Something like the VIA strength profile is actually incredible. One, it's free. You do it online, and it basically ranks your top 50 attributes. So my top two are like creativity and judgment, which might sound negative, but judgment is really being able to make choices and decisions and actually kind of see through the bullshit in many ways.
Yeah.
And for me, sometimes you do have to make a decision on the spot as quickly as you can. And it won't always be the perfect decision, but not making a decision is a lot worse than not making one at all.
Yeah.
And I think something like a VIA profile is actually an incredible way to go, oh, turns out three of my staff members actually, they're in their top 5 are things like learning. It's like, oh, okay, so they actually really care when in fact, if they get a client project and they get to learn something new on that project and impress the client and deliver a project, they're probably at their happiest. And I had no idea. I had no idea until last year when we sat down and went through those profiles.
Yeah, perfect. You heard it here first. It's getting to know the 5 languages of love, getting to know your clients, getting to know your staff. I won't even go into what your 5 languages of love are.
No, right.
All right, so tell us a little bit about, I guess, one of the biggest issues that you see in business today and why you think that needs changing.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. I think for me, one of the biggest maybe biggest issues, I guess, is institutionalized education. Now, I'm a person who kind of finished school and went to university and did that structure, and that's absolutely fine. There's lots of reasons to do that. And funnily enough, most of the people that I employ probably have a similar kind of secondary education or tertiary education, because it demonstrates that they can, they can be disciplined, they can achieve things, they can turn up on time. Those are actually the key aspects. Whereas most of the people that I've worked with have actually told me that in the first 1 or 2 years they worked with us, they learnt more than they did in the entire time they're at university, even sometimes in the first few months, because it's practical and it's hands-on. So there's probably 2 sides to that. There's the personal component of education. So, we don't teach kids how to love. We don't teach kids, I don't know, what to tell somebody when their partner's dying. Like, we don't teach people that, right? We don't teach people how to be rich. We don't teach people how to be poor. We don't teach people how to be famous. So you have these teenagers that, have a windfall in money, or they do great work, and then all of a sudden they're like, what do I do? Then they self-implode, right? We're not teaching kids those skill sets. I left high school and one of my friends asked me how to open a bank account. I was just like, didn't you have like a Commonwealth Bank Dolomite account when you were a kid or something?
Everyone had a Dolomite account.
I was just surprised. I was just like, what do you mean you don't know how to bank account? Like, get some ID, go to the bank, fill out some paperwork, have a conversation. He was just bewildered because his parents had never given him that skill set. They'd never educated him. And I think institutions have the ability to really take a forward step in that. If you look at schools 100 years ago and schools now, it's still rows of seats, teacher at the front. And that has worked to a degree, but there'd be a lot of people, especially in the education space, that would say the space they're in, how they sit, how they interact, creative time, play time is not being leveraged enough in our schooling system. And that schooling system ultimately has an effect on how business runs, and the kind of candidates that you have coming into new business. And then, of course, there's the other component, which is on the business side, the education around what you do within business, furthering people's needs. I mean, I think there's that old quote that says, if you're not building your dreams, then somebody will hire you to build theirs type idea. And very much so, I see that you don't necessarily have to be, not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, right? But if you go into a business and you don't own your role and you don't feel like you are increasing your skill set, you are developing who you are, then you're really missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
In fact, when I look at my team at the moment, that's probably one of the number one things that I feel like they often cry out to me for is like, hey, when can I get onto that next course? When can I spend some time actually just being creative on its own? Look, there's countless studies that will say great ideas, they do come in the shower when you're relaxing, when you're going for a walk. They actually don't come when you're working your 5-day week, 8 hours a day. And there's so much opportunity to educate people. By all means, tertiary education and university, etc., takes whatever it may be, they may all be great pathways. If you listen to somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk or something, he'll talk about 30-day month, 24 hours a day, 720 hours. You sleep 8 hours a day, so that's 240 hours. So you're down to 480 hours of time. Now, of course, you still have to eat. So let's say you spend 2 hours every day eating. That's 60 hours of the month. Great. Now you're down to 420 hours. And then you're like, okay, let's take out time with your family. Say 3 hours a day, time with your family. That's 90 hours. So, and it kind of keep coming down. All of a sudden, I think the number that you come up with is usually after you've taken out all the things you have to do and want to do out of your time, you probably still have somewhere between 180 and 240 hours a month left, which means you have the better part of a couple of thousand hours a year to learn a new skill, develop yourself, like all those things that people aren't doing with their time. And I feel that ties directly into how they get educated.
Yeah, and you feel that with Netflix.
Quite possibly. Quite possibly.
But in all seriousness, like I see this a lot too, where, especially us as entrepreneurs and any career that you've undertaken, the education we've received hasn't set us up to undertake the tasks that we need to. What do you think is the solution?
That's a good question. So two quotes kind of tend to come to mind. Actually, three quotes tend to come to mind. One is from the Talmud, the religious text of the Talmud, which says, you don't see things as they are, you see things as you are. And I think the way that you view education, the way you view your job, the way you own your role, that says more about how you see the world than it is about how the world is. Kind of Albert Einstein said that, reality is kind of an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. We all think we are seeing the same thing. We all think we experience the world the same way. But that isn't the case. And so I think giving people the opportunity to learn in different ways is a real key thing. I think Wes Jackson, actually, he's an agriculturist. Wes Jackson said that if your life's work can be completed in a lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. And there's a lot of that really in the last few years that has resonated with me. This idea that if your purpose isn't greater and you're not trying to achieve something that you can't achieve literally in the next 10 years, that maybe you're not thinking larger than your own sphere. I think Elon Musk actually said that if you look at your 10-year goal and you try to achieve that in 6 months, you probably won't get there, but you'll get a lot more done than the person who puts together a 10-year goal and then tracks that 10-year goal. And I think there's a lot to be said for that as well.
So what are you saying? Are you saying it's a mindset change? Are you saying it's a goal-setting exercise? Because fundamentally, no one's going to change the schooling system unless, ScoMo, if you're listening, something needs to change. But what is it that's going to change? Do we need something outside of university? Is university becoming redundant? Is there an entrepreneurial school? We're seeing plenty of different colleges come up, which, quite frankly, I think is a waste of time half the time.
Look, I think you probably touched on it. I think vocational colleges and training institutes are a really strong place. SAE, JMC Academy, these kind of places for creative, the creative arts, they're really key. The other day I went to a restaurant in Ryde, actually, which is the Cordon Bleu restaurant. It's a restaurant run by students. And actually being in that restaurant and seeing these kids who must be 15, 16, 18, 20, actively running an actual restaurant as part of their education, I thought, now that's incredible. And my partner has really specific dietary requirements. So going there and giving them this list of dietary requirements and seeing these 3 21-year-old chefs kind of go, uh-oh, but they took it on as a challenge. They were invigorated by this idea. And I thought that was quite an incredible thing. So to come back to your question, is it goal setting? Is it, all those kind of things? One, I actually do think that education can be transformed. In fact, a friend of mine, Daniel Smith from Leaf Architecture, he specifically, his entire architectural practice, or at least the majority of it, 90% of it, is probably focused around education. Now, that might seem like, well, aren't schools just like big boxes and you put a roof on it and put some seats in it or whatever? But the attention they have to natural light, the fact that he makes walls curved, not always just straight. Why would you do that? Well, because they know that kids are going to be on their phone with a backpack on their back, and they're going to lean into a wall in the hallway inside one of those curves and even slide down to the wall and just be on their phone. They're not impeding the traffic in the hallway, but they're getting a moment to like step aside or take a breath. And these become all opportunities for learning, opportunities for education. Even at university, I mean, I had quite a liberal university education because I was at an arts university.
Yeah.
We had a lecturer who would say to us, to be a great filmmaker, to be a great digital storyteller, you've got to be a thief, you've got to be a gangster, you've got to be able to kind of like do things people aren't willing to do, you've got to be willing to cut corners where people won't cut corners, you've also got to be willing to stand up for yourself when you need to. And I mean, that really stuck with me because when I went out of there straight into kind of more work, one of the first bosses I ever had said to me, the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. I was like, and it kind of just, I sat there for a moment, I was just like, the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. And so, would that be like walking past, trash on the floor, which could just go straight into the bin that's literally right next to it? Or would that be kind of looking at a project and going, good enough? And if the reality is, if you have to say it's good enough, it probably isn't. So, for me, I think, yes, goal setting is part of it, but yes, I actually do think there's a physical change to space and a physical change to structure for education that makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of giving students more time to think and pursue their own ideas is a great thing. School shouldn't be about learning information and regurgitating that information, because you don't teach kids to be creative. And to be honest with you, being creative, whether it be like creative in a business or creative, with graphic arts, whatever it may be, is still one of the kind of fundamental requirements of being able to be an adult. I don't think there's any business that doesn't require some level of creativity. Some people will say, "Oh, I'm not creative. I don't know. I run an accounting firm. I'm not creative." It's like, yeah, but actually, we want to do creative accounting, right? We don't want to kind of cook the books, but there are ways to engage your audience in different ways.
Yeah.
There are ways to make your audience feel more like going to the accountant's, not like going to the dentist. And I know some great people in those kind of areas that are doing great work.
And how often in your time do you think you've brought somebody into the business to complement your weakness as opposed to learning it yourself? Because, often we see it a lot where the entrepreneurs wear so many different hats, marketing, accounting, finance, sales, and taking those hats off at one at a time and doing sales and doing accounting at the same time isn't necessarily the easiest task. And so that's where I see education can fall down most certainly. How often do you think you've brought somebody in versus you learning how to do that task?
I think when the business first started, it was definitely like wear as many hats as you can. I'm a big believer in. So I tend to, if things are either going wrong or they're not quite aligning the way I want, I tend to have the attitude, and I'm not necessarily saying it's a good attitude, but I tend to have the attitude of kind of going longer, going deeper, going harder in terms of what you do. We're having a shortfall on money, let's go borrow some money, and let's make sure that we have whatever we need to keep going. I guess to answer your question, in terms of looking at the business over the last probably 5 years, that's where really it's transformed, where I've been bringing people in to do things that are significantly better at what I used to do than even I was. If right now, if I sat down to do an animated explainer video right now, which is one of the things we do for large corporates and a whole range of businesses, I would not be capable of doing it. That's in short version is I can do the creative. I definitely have the ideas, and that still very much sits with me in lots of ways in the business. But I know that our 2 senior motion designers would run circles around me every day in terms of the ability to actually execute the ideas that I have. And that's partially because I haven't necessarily kept that skill set up on purpose, though, because there are other parts of the business that I need to be focused on. Whereas if I still had to be the problem solver for their individual graphic issues, then it means how could I possibly, do sales? How could I do marketing? How could I do other things? It reminds me, actually, have you ever read the book The Crucible? Maybe you read it at school or something. Arthur Miller. It's actually based on a lot of those characters in that book are actually based on real people. But there's a character in there called Giles Corey, and the short version of The Crucible is basically it's the Salem witch trials, and they're getting people to speak out against family members, friends, by calling them witches, so that they can then burn those people at the stake or hang them or whatever it may be. And there's this person, Giles Corey, and they're asking him to speak out against his wife. And he refuses to. So what they do is they put a plank of wood on his chest, they lay him down on the floor, and they start loading up stones, heavy stones, which is basically slowly crushing him. And this is actually, like I said, it's an historical figure as well, but basically they keep loading up these stones and asking him, will you now will you now kind of call your wife a witch? And I will get to a point, I promise. They keep kind of doing this, and then right at the end, they're like, "Oh, he's finally willing to say something. I can see that he's gesturing to say that he wants to say something." So they kind of lean in really close, and they say, "Yes, yes, tell us. Give us a name. Give us the name of somebody who's a witch that we can who's that we can accuse of this kind of grievous crime." And he says, "More weight." That's all he says. And then they put more weight on. His chest crushes. He dies under the weight of the stones. And for me, in many ways, that's how I see entrepreneurs most of the time. And that's how I see myself in business most of the time, which is, oh, we're having a sales issue, I'll do more sales. Oh, we're having a marketing problem, let me get involved. And I do think entrepreneurs probably still need to continue doing that to some degree. Their team still needs leadership. They still need, potentially, they're going to have times when you can let them loose and let them run, but then you're still going to have to check in. You're still going to have to hold their hand sometimes. And I don't think it's fair to say, I just let it go and who cares type thing. I also think that it's important to understand whether or not the brand is at the front or whether you're at the front. I think somebody like Richard Branson, he's probably one of the only entrepreneurs that I think of that his personal brand is probably greater than Virgin's. Virgin's a great brand, they do great things, but Richard Branson is probably better known, and his personal brand is probably greater than the company's.
He's actually a great example on this particular topic. What are your thoughts on the saying of a business will never outgrow its founder? I mean, it's something that it's been thrown around a fair bit. What are your thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I mean, I'd love to understand what people's interpretation of that is. I tend to take a more abstract interpretation of that, maybe, which is that, a founder, he may outgrow the founder's skill set, he may outgrow the founder's budgets, all those kind of things. But if the mindset and the vision of that founder is limited, then it'd be very, very difficult for the business to ever surpass that. That's
the key that I'm trying to make here. Well, I subscribe to that thought where the business doesn't outgrow its founder. I think it's so easy for a founder or a business owner or an entrepreneur to get into business, bring others on board and have them do the role for you, accounting, sales, whatever it might be. But the vision still needs to be set as a team, and I believe that founder needs to continue to develop to ensure that the vision is continually refined, the mindset of the business flows down. That's something I'm incredibly passionate about, as you would know. We spend a fair bit of time on personal development. That's something we're passionate about. How often do you spend on your personal development? Not only yourself personally, but maybe within your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably on my personal development, I've probably been spending a lot more time in the last 12 months. I think that the pandemic has been good for that. Not because it's given me more spare time, but I've been more driven to actually go, okay, I've just done a 16-hour day, but let me spend another hour or two looking at things that aren't necessarily business related, but are actually more focused on my interests, because I feel like getting more educated in other areas and my interests is going to make me a better business person. It's going to give me a more well-rounded perspective on what's happening in business. In particular is that, ultimately, like my staff will often, they'll spend their lunch times or even work hours watching YouTube. And people are like, oh my God, that's horrible. Let's lock down YouTube. Let's lock down Facebook. I'm like, well, actually, that's where they're going to see the next bit of inspiring piece of content or generate an idea or create. And so for me, having that liberty in the business is a good thing. And I probably don't do it enough personally. On the business side, even this week I'm doing a workshop on LinkedIn, on proposals. I actually did one in the middle of COVID, which was actually really eye-opening, which is this idea that there's this person in the US, and when he sends out a proposal, he doesn't send it out. He sends an email, he makes an appointment, and then he goes through the proposal physically online with that person in front of him. So he never sends them a PDF ahead of time and says, hey, here you go, here's the proposal, let's catch up on Tuesday. On Tuesday, the very first time they ever see the proposal, he pulls it up on screen and he goes through it page by page and makes sure the proposal matches their needs. So what happens is at the end of that process, he's like, cool, here's your proposal. And there is no way the proposal doesn't reflect the requirements and the needs of that client. And because of that, it's not, you can't just put whatever price you want on it, but the point is they have now demonstrated the value. They understand the proposal is exactly what they need. So there are no hindrances to the potential to say yes. And then he basically puts the correct number on and says, hey, this is the number that this is going to require to get this job done. And his strike rate went from kind of 20% on proposals up to like 90% on proposals. And I can see a lot of value in stuff like that. So I think educating myself continually on the way that other people do things and how we do things. For example, even now in the business, we now send out essentially a full proposal on everything. Doesn't matter whether it's $1,000 job or a $50,000 job or a $100,000 job. Essentially the clients get the same level of proposal. It has full terms and conditions. It has the investment the investment estimate. It has a brief. It has a title page. And like that probably seems like an overkill when the client's just like, hey, can you just send me a number? And of course, in those cases, the clients just send me a ballpark number. Fine, here's a ballpark number. But we're really trying to make an effort, one, to make all our clients feel like they are on equal footing, that they're just as important as each other, and that also our brand is consistent. That we are like, this is how we present ourselves. This is what's important to us. And it's important to us because ultimately it's important to you in how we create and produce your work.
Yeah. Look, I think we've come full circle in the sense that it really sounds like you put in a lot of effort. I mean, a lot of the scenarios that you've mentioned are things that you've taken time out of your day to learn outside of videography, outside of what it is to run a business. It's just developing your knowledge, developing your personal mindset. And that personal development, I think, is huge when it comes to blocking, or I guess at least plugging a gap in the education piece that you or I probably didn't get at school.
No, absolutely.
So we can look at solving the education, I guess, issue now. Again, ScoMo, if you can call a few people in the education department. But I think definitely when it comes to entrepreneurs listening to this, there's definitely, I guess, a way to plug that, and that's to continually to take in the media, take in the content that's out there. I mean, you hear plenty of people like, again, Gary V will talk about, or Grant Cardone will talk about the University of Highway, right? The Highway University. There's so much, we've got so much access to content these days, whether it's podcasts or it's this one. I hope plenty of people are getting value out of this. Whether it's webinars, whatever it might be, YouTube, there's so much content out there, I guess, to make sure entrepreneurs build on that. So I think that's perfect.
And look, it's making it focused, right? I mean, the stats say that people typically, they think they look at their phone 30 to 40 times a day. The average is closer to 80 to 100 times.
Yep.
So that means if you're only conscious about...
I'm pretty sure Apple tells me how much time I spend on my phone, and it's not great.
But if you think about those stats, if you think about thinking, the perception of 30 or 40 times versus 80 or 100, that means half the times that you're looking at your phone, you're probably not, it's not purposeful, it's not focused, it's not driven by anything in particular, it's not motivated in any way, which means that literally that's wasted time. And not only is it wasted time, but it's also that time that you could be putting into... I mean, if you talk about what we were talking about earlier, a couple of 100 hours a month worth of kind of free time to either run a business, build your entrepreneurship, whatever it may be, the average TAFE course is 200, kind of vocational training course is 200 hours a year of contact time. Well, we've proven that you probably have at least half that time in a month, per month. So every 2 months, you could literally be skilling yourself up on an entire new skill set. In my business, I pick and choose the jobs that I physically pick up a camera for now. Yes, I'm still a great cinematographer, but one, there are better people out there than me.
Yep.
Where my strength is in ideas, and I pick and choose the projects I want to work on. That's because the other part of my time is on marketing, on sales, on team management, on vision, on actually also spending a lot of time with other entrepreneurs, talking to them about their vision and their ideas.
Yep.
I mean, one of the greatest things that I've probably done over the last couple of years is join not just networking groups, but like-minded groups of like mentors or advisory boards.
Absolutely.
People that you can speak to honestly and openly about what's going on in your business. Yes, sign an NDA. Yes, sit in that room for 10 hours one day a month or something. And it has an incredible value to, one, your mental health. Because, I mean, if we're talking about, a business issue right now, I talked about education, but the other education in business that's not happening is around well-being and mental health.
Absolutely.
If you ask somebody about, I don't know, when you talk to people about, I guess, mental states, mindset, all the rest of it, they tend to gravitate towards mental illness, not mental health. And really, if the focus is on mental health as an educational component, then you'd probably see businesses that aren't driving their employees into the ground. I mean, there are definitely businesses where I feel like there are businesses where the focus is not only just on the dollars, but it's on the hierarchy. It's not on actually ideas. I mean, it's an old thing now, but if you think about IBM, when IBM did the whole here's a box, put in your idea about the vision for IBM over the next 30 years. And it was some guy, in a low-level position, that put in a little piece of paper that said, I think we should start making computers. I think we should start focusing on strategy and like data and that kind of thing. He transformed a $1 billion business with an idea that wasn't from the top. And I think if you don't give people the opportunity to educate themselves and opportunity to spread their wings, you're probably just missing out on half of the opportunities in business.
Exactly right. And you spoke about vision. Tell us a little bit about what your vision is for business moving forward, particularly with
Yep.
education being a big challenge. But what's your vision for business moving forward, and then in specific your business? Where are you heading?
It's funny when I think about this, about business moving forward, what that looks like. To be honest with you, I'm coming out of, clearly I'm in a business that produces content. And so usually that content sits on a screen of some kind. But my hope, maybe don't call it a vision, maybe it's a hope. My hope for the future is fewer screens. So my hope is actually that we spend less time in front of screens, and the time that we spend is more purposeful and more, it's more connected to our loves and our wants and our hopes for our own lives and lives of our children, etc. But that's kind of at a base level, less screens. So that means less screens potentially means less consumers for the product that I produce, right? I'm producing content. But I think fewer screens and more attention to how we use our hands, how we use our minds, thinking. If you talk to any great chef and say, what's the number one ingredient in your food? Half of them are going to say, my brain, like my mind. They're not going to say strawberries. They're not going to say a beautiful tomato. They're going to give you, the ingredient's going to be their ability to create. I don't believe in writer's block. I don't believe in it. Now, lots of people would say, I'm a writer. I've had writer's block 3 years. I haven't produced a novel. I don't believe in it because I think writer's block tends to originate from the kind of hoarding of ideas. What if somebody else knows what I know? What if somebody else learns something that I learn? And if you take that attitude in business, then you tend to find yourself constantly limited. How can you replace yourself if you're so worried about handing over the knowledge? And that knowledge transfer, I think that doesn't happen through screens necessarily. I think that knowledge transfer comes through storytelling. It comes through, I'm talking face-to-face, physical storytelling. It's why a podcast like this can do just as well as audio as it does as a video. Because people can, it's like being told a story by your grandparents. And that's a really big thing. We won't even get into the whole Indigenous issues in Australia, but that storytelling component is a key thing. And I think the more we can bring back storytelling, reduce screens, the more that businesses can combine their resources to create greater change in the world, the better. For me, that's kind of more the vision or the hope that I have.
That's a real 180 as to what we're seeing. My iPhone is only getting bigger.
Well, that's the thing.
The screen is only getting bigger. We've got 3 screens in the office. It's crazy.
No, look, I totally get it. And if I look at my phone, I'm always constantly trying to get my phone down to under a 5 or 6 inch phone. Because it's like, it used to be kind of like, back in my day, typewriters were twice that size, right? Well, these days, it's like, back in my day, my phone was half that size because, you used to have your little flip phone that was about a quarter the size of a current smartphone. And but don't get me wrong, smartphones you're walking around with a computer in your pocket, right? Which is amazing. It's an incredible thing. The size of the computer they use to send people to NASA, it's like 30 rooms worth of computing, and it fits in a phone now. That's quite an amazing thing. And yes, it has the opportunity to teach, to educate, but we typically don't use it that way. Like we don't.
And so where are you taking your business?
I'm getting out of video. No, I'm kidding. No. No, look, I think in terms of the vision for my business, I'd never had a plan to be a 30-person business. We actually were a 10-person business at one point, or 9-person business at one point. And we actually shrunk back down to 6 because I wanted people to be more motivated and more driven by what they were doing, and also more engaged by what they were doing. So they weren't just doing one tiny little part of a bigger process that made them feel very lost. I have a friend who actually worked on Happy Feet, the animation, a few years ago. And he spent 2 years doing the nose on the supporting penguin. So not even the main penguin in Happy Feet, the supporting actor penguin, the 3D penguin, he did their nose for 2 years. So for 2 years of his life, that's all he saw every day. And I'm like, if you think about working on a 3D film, a big kind of feature film, you're like, oh, what an amazing opportunity. It's like, yeah, but then you realize that it's broken down in these tiny microscopic tasks. And it's very easy to get lost in that task instead of something bigger. I'm the kind of person that totally gets lost in individual tasks because I'm persistent to get it finished. And I sometimes lose, perspective on the bigger vision of what I'm trying to achieve that particular day or week or month. I think Bill Gates actually said that people underestimate, so they overestimate what you can achieve in a year and they underestimate what you can achieve in a decade. I'm sure Warren Buffett probably said the same thing. They're like consistent results, focusing on what's important and what's holding up your business the most is probably the number one thing. Lots of people ascribe to the idea of a business where Get there in the morning, list of 20 tasks, do the most important tasks first. And it's like, well, actually, if you're building a team, and this is really the vision that I have for my business is built around this idea. If you're building a team and you want to build a business that is greater than you as a founder, then instead of being focused in your daily tasks on what's most important or what's going to generate the most income, focus on the tasks first that are going to hold up your team the most. If that means they need a piece of feedback, they need a proposal done, they need some creative input, they need a decision made about something, that's the thing you tackle first. Because honestly, as an entrepreneur, if it's 11 o'clock at night, that's when you get to the proposal that you have to send in a couple of days' time, that's fine. But your team is there, they're on your money, they're on their own time, and they actually care about their time. They don't care they're getting paid, they care that they're on their own time. They're choosing to be there. For me, that's kind of the vision that I have for my business is really about not just the macro, but the micro. Kind of really looking at my team and saying, okay, where can I help you? I'm here in service of you. And I think a lot of businesses forget that.
I think you're 100% correct, where people think as if they jump into business and staff come on board to help them obtain a result. We've really taken a different view, and we've seen it be successful, where it's about focusing on your people and being a people-focused business. Those people will look after your customers, and together you can achieve more collectively than what you can individually. So.
Well, to be honest with you, God forbid that people in business and entrepreneurs had the attitude or had an attitude more like a drug dealer than they did a business entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is, if you ever watch something like Miami Vice by Michael Mann, great film. Anyway, there's a drug dealer in that film, and he says, when I hire you, I'm not hiring you for your service, I'm hiring you for an outcome. And it's like, and that's it. Everything else in business is irrelevant. They're not hiring you for your service, they're hiring you for an outcome. So if I'm going to produce a great marketing campaign and the campaign flops, there might be other factors there, but ultimately I have an accountability. A piece of that accountability is mine to say, did we give the right advice? Did we just take the paycheck because we just had to get the project done? Or did I actually say to a client, that's never going to work. It's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Am I willing to give up a paycheck for better advice, building a more trusted relationship and essentially a better outcome at the end of the day?
Hey, I think that's perfect. There's so much business advice in drug dealing.
Drug dealing, absolutely.
I'm more of a power type of guy, but it's all about the network, Got to make sure it's solid. Mate, Gary, thank you so much again for coming on the show. It's been fantastic having you. Did you want to put a shout out to any of your socials? Where can people find you?
The company name is Lumapixel. That's Lumapixel. We're just about to launch our new website, although that may be dated by the time you guys see this podcast. But by all means, get behind it. To be honest with you, socials for us it's about reputation. It's about people actually seeing the kind of work that we're producing and understanding that that's the kind of stuff we can produce for them. We've got an incredible team, 6 people in Sydney, 75 around the country, and we punch well above our weight. So I would encourage anybody who is looking to produce great content to have a conversation, open a dialogue.
Love that. Thank you. And thank you, guys. That's Gary Freitas. Cheers. Socius, thank you for joining us today. Please hit the subscribe button if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the Socius community, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch. Cheers.